trail town approach. And yeah, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to have some Q&A and a panel. There's so much I want to say, but I think probably the best place to start is the beginning. So if it would be okay with everyone, I'm going to just read a passage from the book. There we go, back to where I meant to be. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning. So in the first couple of pages, I was contrasting two opposite perspectives on trails. And this is what I said. First, I was talking about communities, trail communities facing challenges. And then I say, I couldn't believe it when a community leader in a small town along one of America's most noted trails announced, that trail costs us more than it brings in. People who espouse such thinking contend that trails are more trouble than they're worth because they drain communities of their resources. I have to wonder how a trail that the National Geographic has called an American classic fails to gain the appreciation of a local leader. What's even more perplexing, though, is along this same trail, a mere 50 miles away, I've been told the opposite. Once years ago, I was doing some work along the trail when a crotchety-looking fellow shouted, "Are you with the trail?" I nodded yes and braced myself. Thankfully, I must have misread his tone or body language because when he got closer to me, he offered, "This trail is the best thing that's ever happened to this town." This contrast between two opposing perspectives along the very same ribbon of trail raises an important question about the value of trails. What's the reality? Are trails just time-sapping money drains, or are they the best thing since sliced bread? And I continue to refer to these two, statements throughout the book because I think that they're so telling. And of course, I think that the second one is the one that is really most accurate when it comes to trail communities. And it's not just what I think. There's just research that is there's just a ton of research on the benefits of trails and how good they are for communities. So I also, in this same part of the book, I go on to write, just as asphalt can crack from the inside out, so can communities. The notion that a trail, any trail, is more trouble than it's worth says that there are problems simmering beneath the surface in the adjoining community. I think what's happening when a community doesn't see the value in trails is that they're taking a narrow view. They're thinking only about the cash register moment and economic return. What happens when we take a narrow view of the benefits of trails is we fail to acknowledge their many benefits. While the economic benefit is quite significant, so much of the magic of trails has little to do with economics and everything to do with human interactions and joy-inducing nature experiences. People enjoy trails for their serenity, for an opportunity to exercise. They enjoy them because they are having adventures, having fun connecting with friends. Kids are learning to bike outside of on trails. People walk their dogs on trails. Some people, like me, get married on trails. And I want to thank my wife, Kathy, who's with us tonight and was so supportive throughout the process of writing the book and is supportive in every other way. So there's a lot to love about trails. You wouldn't be here spending your evening with us if you didn't agree with me. About the book, Deciding on Trails is split into 3 sections. First, I talk about the history of the Trail Town movement, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Then I outline what I consider to be 7 best practices for trail communities, and I close with a call to action. The best practices, as you see here, include things like investing in quality trails, knowing your market, and having adequate infrastructure that improves the physical connection between your trail and town. These are things like bike lanes and bike racks, directional signs, public art, and interpretive panels. There are 7 in total, but the one that I consider to be the bedrock best practice is cultivating a trail culture. To me, this is the one that is the most important, and it shows up in all of those other practices. The globe, by the way, is in Connellsville along the Great Allegheny Passage. Sharon will be talking later today about Connellsville, but this was done by a high school student, and it's right on the trail at a prime location. And it was just an easy way for the community to welcome trail users into town and to express, for the community to express its enthusiasm for the trail. Trail culture can be seen and felt throughout communities. We see trail-themed window displays, menu items like the trail cider sandwich and the bike lane burger, sculptures crafted from bikes and canoes. Local groups host 5Ks and weekly walking meetups on trails. People advocate for their trails and volunteer to help maintain them. It's only when this trail supportive culture exists that we can sustain a trail economy over time. And I think really that's the central point of the entire book. That's part of my motivation for writing the book, was to get that message out here. It's only when we have this trail supportive culture that someone visiting our community is going to come into town and sense the community's enthusiasm for the trail and want to come back. And if they can't sense that enthusiasm or that energy that comes around whenever there's a trail culture, they're unlikely to return a planned visit or to plan a return visit. There's just something that's missing. And I know if all of you who have traveled know what I'm talking about. So I hope that you're seeing the connection between deeply valuing trails and the value that we get returned from them. So I noticed an Amazon review of the book the other day that said, trail development is community development. And I think this is what the Trailtown visionaries must have had in mind when they first crafted the program in the early 2000s. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Linda McKenna Box of the Gap Conservancy and a number of other people and organizations wanted more for trail communities. They envisioned a program that was modeled after the successful Main Street approach to community development. The Gap became, and when I say the Gap, that's the Great Allegheny Passage, became the first place the program was tested when in 2007, my former employer, the Progress Fund, housed the very first Trailtown program along the Gap. Some of you know Kathy McCollum. She and I were the first program staff, and we had the honor to launch this great idea in communities all along the Gap. The idea, again, was there were missed opportunities, and this program was going to try to, close some of those gaps and create more opportunity for trail communities. So what was a 2-state, 8-community program has since been modeled all around the United States and Canada. There's a Trailtown presence in at least 28 states, as well as Ontario, which is a program I helped to create. The dark green on the map are places where there is a Trailtown presence. And because we're gathered by Rivers of Steel tonight, which is a national heritage area that focuses on industrial heritage, I want to point out that the green on the map, a lot of that is post-industrial America. So it's a place where trails came in, where there was a lot of pain and frustration around economic loss, and places that are taking advantage of trails in the outdoor economy. So the term Trailtown is one that I think people just get now. This is a part of the growth and evolution of this idea of trail towns over the years. And one of the ways that I measure that is through the Trailtown hashtag. I follow the hashtag on Instagram, and the first time it was ever used was in 2013. And it was used only 5 times that year. Now, this is like 6 years after Trail Towns was started, 3 years after Instagram was started, and this hashtag was used 5 times. But now I get alerts every single day, multiple times a day, that people, mostly trail users, are tagging their photos with Trailtown. It's been used almost 5,000 times now. So people just get and understand trail towns, including, as we were talking about before the meeting officially started, breweries. They get it and they're great supporters of trails. In terms of implementing a structured trail town program or trail community program, what it means to be a trail town in Kentucky may vary from what it does in Michigan or in Alaska or right here along the Gap. There are formal programs and they're all just designed in their own way. But at the most basic level, you can think of a trail town as being a place that supports trail users with services and embraces its trail as a resource to be protected and celebrated. That's just the most basic way of thinking about it. It's an attitude that's cultivated toward trails. And it's when a community has decided to invest in trails. This notion of deciding to pay attention to trails or to invest in them is why I named the book Deciding on Trails. I think every community along a trail faces that decision as to whether they're going to become invested and connect to their trails or any of their outdoor resources. So with this, I figured I would take a few minutes to talk about why I wrote the book and how it's impacted me personally. So the first time I ever remember wanting to write a book about trail towns was in 2013. Coincidentally, that same year that the hashtags were first used. And at first, I think I just wanted to memorialize the origin of the trail town approach, being one of the people that was there early on. I wanted to sort of like get it onto paper and share it with people. And as someone with a professional history in community development, I wanted to share what I knew about this approach and how it helps to improve communities. But the truth was, I was completely overwhelmed by the idea of writing a book. I had no idea where to start. I had what I called a book box. And what that was a banker's box with years of presentation notes and articles and ideas that I scribbled on the papers. And it was just this big, giant mess, of papers thrown into the box. Every year, I made a New Year's resolution to write the book. And then in January of 2000, I made that resolution one last time. What I did was I pulled the box out, spread the papers across my dining room table, and I started organizing. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but something felt different, and I felt like it was time to really get going. So a friend of mine named Bonnie Budzowski, who's an author and a book coach, she helps people to do their book projects. She provided some early guidance, including the decision around self-publishing. So I did decide to self-publish Deciding on Trails. It would allow me to finish the book faster than if I was shopping it around to publishers. So I started in January of 2020, and by December 29th, we pressed the publish button on Amazon and the book was out there. So it was a project in one sense that took a really long time. It took 6 or 7 years to get around to it, but then it took less than a year to finish. Also, just for those that are kind of interested in this kind of a topic, I worked with a company called Plug and Play Publishing, and they helped to see me through my book project. So all of the ideas were my own, the content was mine, I did the writing, but they helped me to organize. It's Weston, he's the person I worked with. He helped me to revise and to set me up with an editor, and they did the graphic layout and everything, and then saw me through the actual publishing. So it was great to have a company to hold me accountable and work with me from week to week as I was moving the project forward. And speaking of editing, I just want to mention my editor, Chris Abbott. She's one of the wisest, sharpest, kindest people I know, and it was such an honor to work with her on this project. So I have just a couple more thoughts here as I'm winding down. A friend of mine, Natalie Warren, She recently wrote "Writing is a Privilege." She's an author, by the way. She wrote Hudson Bay Bound, which is a really great travelogue memoir of her time canoeing to the Hudson Bay. And her point, though, is that not everyone has the time or the space to write. For 6 years, I wasn't ready to write Deciding on Trails. And if I had done it at the beginning, it would have been like a totally different book, and one that I'm not sure that I would have liked. But when I was ready in 2020, our lives were turned upside down with the pandemic. Being part of the DINK demographic, that's double income, no kids, I had the privilege to keep writing. I didn't face any of the enormous challenges that so many other people were. Parents, teachers, frontline workers, people, physically affected, by COVID. I just could keep writing, and the book gave me something to feel excited about during the pandemic and what was a really hard time. So I was one of the lucky ones last year, and I'm lucky to be here now, 10 months later, celebrating at last and having a community conversation about trails and how they benefit communities. We do have some time for Q&A before we get into the panel, and Susie Bloom of Rivers of Steel is going to get us started with that.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you also for sharing your time with us tonight. And I have my copy here. I read the book. It's a great read, and I learned a lot of information. Before I open it up to all of you to have a couple questions with Amy. Amy, I wanted to ask you, who is the audience for this book? Who would you recommend this book to?
I wrote the book for people who care about their communities. I wrote it for place champions and just people that have a sense that trails can make a difference in their communities, and have heard of this idea of trail towns, but don't quite understand what it means or how to do it. I know a lot of trail professionals, economic development, planning professionals who have read the book, but they weren't the intended audience. I wanted to write it first and foremost for community people.
All right, and one more question from me, and then I'll open it up to the others. This could relate to the book or your lifetime of working with trails and trail towns, but what would you say is your favorite unexpected outcome of that work?
I think my favorite outcome of being involved in trail towns is that I have made friends all around North America. The last person who was just admitted into the waiting room, into the meeting, was Sally O'Neill, who lives in Nova Scotia, and she's a great example of that. We've become friends.
Hello, friend.
Hi, Sally. Good to have you here.
I brought a friend with me. There's a colleague coming with me too.
Oh, okay, great. And there's someone else from Nova Scotia here as well. So,
yeah, Greg.
Yeah, it's a takeover. I've made friends who are in other places, and the friendship, the friendships are based on a shared interest in trails, nature, and community, and how these things come together. And at the end of the day, we all just want our communities to do well and to be places that are thriving and enjoyable. And that's a great place to start to build relationships.
Thank you. If anyone else has a question for Amy, and we will have time again at the end after the panel for more questions, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question, or if you prefer to type it in the chat box, we'll be watching there for any questions to come through.
It's always so tough with Zoom.
It is. Let's see, how long do you wait? But I'll let you all gather your thoughts.
Hey, Amy, this is Bryan Perry with Great Allegheny Passage Conservancy. A question for you. In your book, you pivot at one point to explaining that in your mind and in the mind of another author and mentor that you've had, trail towns ought really to be thinking about how they're best positioned for their own residents, first and foremost, less on the outside audience. In other words, if folks are bringing flourishing to the places where they live, tourists will naturally follow and enjoy some of the same amenities. Can you say a little bit more about some examples that follow well with that interesting logic?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that I think you might be referring to there's a place in the book where I say, like, you know, you don't want to build trails or connect to trails for visitors, right? You want to do it for your local residents, and then any visitors that come, that's just additional benefit. Those are additional, you know, great fun human connections that take place, and it's good for your economy, right? But I mean, we really have to build trails and pay attention to them and connect to them for our local residents. You know, I'm trying to think of some examples of places that have done that well. One thing that I should mention is whenever we were first doing this along the Gap, we were really heavily focused on tourism and economic development. And, you know, I think that's just something we weren't really thinking a whole lot about back then, was, you know, local resident benefit, other than those residents that are involved in the tourism and hospitality industry. And then the Appalachian Trail Conservancy came along and created their program, which was, you know, not long after the Trailtown program here was established. And I loved how they sort of like shifted the focus. They shifted it. First of all, they took a program that was designed for a 150-mile rail trail, and they made it work for a 2,200-mile footpath, you know, across, you know, many states. And but they made it resident focused. They had, you know, communities there, you know, were required to host celebrations of the trail, and they had, you know, classroom activities like trail in every classroom, they call it, that program, to like get kids out onto trails. And they were really like making it about trail stewardship and local residents connecting to it. And then, you know, again, the visitor benefit, the economic benefit, that's added bonus. I think I saw a hand up from Greg, maybe. Greg, did you have your hand up?
There we go. There we go. Just trying to get unmuted. Amy, in your work with trail towns, what would you say would be like the 8 or 10 things that just strike you as the things that trail towns have done to not only look after what you suggest, look after their local community, but also to have that wow factor that attracts others to want to use their trail system?
Art, you know, public art done well, and strategically placed. One of my favorite examples of public art is in Frostburg, Maryland, along the Gap. And there are these like 2 wonderful bike themed sculptures that are placed. Are you familiar with them? You look like maybe you're, yeah, but I mean, it's a tough sell to get people up in the Frostburg because of the climb. But I mean, those sculptures and the wayfinding, you know, and they have interpretive panels that are also along these switchbacks. And they're, you know, the town, you know, has done everything it can in the trail group to try to like lure people into town. But, you know, I think public art does a lot of heavy lifting for communities. It's a vibrancy indicator. It can tell people about like your culture and heritage. It can express, you know, a message of welcome, like some of like the chalk art that I showed in the presentation. So those are a couple of things. I don't think I'm going to get to like a whole list of 8 or 10, but, you know, I think just like people are often thinking about the physical infrastructure to ease that transition between the trail and the community and to make it safer. And to make it more informative, because, you know, if you're on a trail, you have to decide, is it worth biking in? Is it worth hiking in to town? So we have to like take that work away. from people and invite them into town and invite the townspeople out to the trail. And we have to make the invitation appealing.
Any other questions before we move into the panel discussion? Okay.
Susie, you have kept us right on time. Good job. So I think it's my job to introduce the panel and to facilitate it, and it's my privilege too. So I want to take a few moments to introduce Bryan, Sharon, and Susie. We'll start with Bryan. I'm now thinking I should have made this font a little bit bigger. Bryan Perry is the Executive Director of the Great Allegheny Passage Conservancy. Prior to joining the GAP Conservancy, he worked in nonprofit management and community development in Pittsburgh, as did I before working in trails. So it's really no surprise that we always have great conversations about the health of trail communities. Mm-hmm. A few of the times we've had these conversations have been outside, walking on trails, my favorite kind of meeting. Bryan, thanks so much for being here tonight and for everything you do for the Great Allegheny Passage. Sharon,
glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Sharon Joseph is the liaison for downtown Connellsville, the community's Main Street organization. And for those who are not familiar with the area, Connellsville is located at mile 60 on the Great Allegheny Passage. So it's not quite halfway, but it's in the middle there. Sharon has the most fascinating background. She owns SAJ Consulting Services. She has her own podcast and recently started Connellsville's first Toastmasters Club. She's lived in New York City and has worked on Wall Street. And it's Connellsville's good fortune that she's where she is now because she has become one of the community's strongest advocates. And finally, with us is Susie Bloom, who you have already heard from. Susie is, she serves as the Director of Education with Rivers of Steel. She's done so since 2017 and has a background in ecology and environmental education. In addition to her position with Rivers of Steel, she is the wife of the owner of Bloom Brew in West Newton, which is another community along the Gap. Something I learned about Susie today when I looked at her LinkedIn profile is that she also carries the job title of tasting room assistant. I think that's the kind of job a lot of us might enjoy. Susie brings the perspective of someone who works at a regional level in tourism and heritage education, but also understands the trials and tribulations of trail serving businesses and the joys of operating a trail serving business. So that's our panel tonight. Thank you all for being here. And why don't we go ahead and get right to it? Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let's see, I wanted to start by having you share some of your observations as to how trail communities along the Gap have embraced and invested in trails. How have communities along the Gap decided on trails? Susie, you might as well go first. I can see you there, right there.
Yeah, I mean, I made a list of places that I like to stop and things that I've heard of over the years. And, you know, recently Rivers of Steel participated in the Yacht and Roll event in Boston, PA, and had a great time with the community there. And I just love the little niche town of Boston and all of the things they have going on there. And locally with me, there's always activities going on at Cedar Creek Park. And Sharon, this is your territory, but I have been so excited since I started following Connellsville Mayor Greg Lincoln on Facebook, and he is always posting about the Gap Trail and promoting events. So I just really enjoy seeing some of these smaller town places that I'm hearing more and more about community events that are attached to the trails. And it seems like they're drawing people in, not only from the community, but from surrounding areas. So it's nice to see that vibrancy indicator. I love that phrase that you used, Amy, to see all of these activities happening.
Yeah. Sharon, what do you think?
I am excited. I'm not, well, you do not know this. I moved to the Connellsville area in 2020, just as the pandemic began. And I've had family members who've lived here. So I've walked the trails before. We lived actually about a quarter mile away from the trails on Ridge Boulevard here in Connellsville. So I've walked the trails, I've ridden, I've exercised on the trails. But since I came last year, March, I've had a new appreciation of it. And coming from a city like New York City, living in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue across the street from Central Park, I always valued nature. But there's something about Connellsville that truly helps you to appreciate the trails, because one of the ability that the fact that it brings in funds to the community, but more than that, it brings people that you wouldn't normally see in your community into the town. And that's one of the things I miss most about New York City. The fact that there's such a diversity of people in New York versus Connellsville, but the trail allows me to get that as people come in and visit.
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
Amy, from my perspective, I have two good examples that I'm thinking of. One is in Rockwood, Pennsylvania, along the Great Allegheny Passage. The local high school has included a Great Allegheny Passage curriculum among its science classes, and the assistant principal there, the science staff, and the superintendent are out on the trail with kids in the fall and spring. And whether it's connected to geology or meteorology or earth science, they are exploring the trail that runs right through their own town, getting down to the river, looking at wildflowers and trees, hiking, walking. They purchased through a grant a bunch of bicycles that the district owns for their students to get out onto the Gap. And I think that's a great example of embracing the trail. And maybe another one, this is a heavy lift for the delightful volunteers in a very small hamlet here called Whitsett, Pennsylvania, a former coal patch community. We run an event called the Great Allegheny Passage Relay every fall. It's a running event from Cumberland to Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh to Cumberland. And inevitably, the folks in Whitsett are ready to receive visitors in the middle of the night, which is when the race, no matter the direction, goes through their community. So their residents and volunteers put on a big bonfire and strike up the grill at 2 a.m. to make pizza and eggs and sandwiches. And they have music going on and a DJ out there. And it's right in the middle of the night under the stars. And that's a lot to put on in the middle of the night for folks, but they do it gladly and voluntarily and willingly to make sure that their community is caring for guests well. It's become a lovely tradition.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love both of those stories. And I really liked Whitsett already. And now I have to figure out how to get myself invited over for that without, doing the whole event. I'll have to go volunteer. So, yeah, that's great. And one of the questions that I had for you three had to do with change that's occurred over time, right? Because a cultural shift doesn't happen all at once. It takes time. And I don't know if it's a fair question or not, because not all of you were like on the Gap, whenever the Trailtown program started 14 years ago. But I'm interested in knowing what shift and what change you've noticed over time in the communities.
I don't mind starting, since I may know the least. I may have the shortest answer on this one. My family have lived, as I mentioned, close to the trails 10, 12 years ago when I lived down here for 2 years. I remember that's when I used to walk the trail and walk from where we lived out to Martin's in the main area of Connellsville. And I remember seeing very few bikers. This is 12 years ago. And I'm sure the trail was up and active and things working well. But I remember seeing very few bikers ride through that trail. And I used it quite often because, as I said, we lived about a quarter mile away from it. What I have seen now, it's just almost like a double in the number of people I see go by on the trail. And now I don't even live so close to the trail, but because being the downtown Connellsville liaison, I interact with businesses and trail users quite often. As a matter of fact, I have this thing where I go out once a week or have dinner at a different restaurant downtown. And I do it not just because the restaurant is within the downtown area. I do it specifically because I want to meet the people who are coming into our town and seeing and hearing their stories. So 2 Fridays ago, I heard a couple was in from Ohio, a couple was in from Pittsburgh. They were doing a 2-day trail and they stayed overnight in Connellsville. And another one was just looking for things to do while they were here. And at that time, we had this amazing bike exhibit. Thank you to Amy and Cycle Forward, who partnered with Downtown Connellsville. So I was happy to let them know, hey, you're coming off the trail. Why not check out our bikes exhibits? So the trail, as it was 12 years ago, 2012 to 2021, it to me has the traffic has improved 100%. So that's my little take on what I have seen.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to jump in quickly and say the exhibit that Sharon's talking about, we did a vintage bike exhibit. We had 30 bikes in 20 locations all around town. I often talk about put a bike on it, where you just want to like have a bike or whatever kind of trail you have, like have something that sort of like shows like we're excited about biking, we're excited about trails. And there's a bike in the storefront, or there's a bike up on the side of the building, or incorporated into a sculpture. So that's what we did. We had vintage bikes all around town. And Susie mentioned Mayor Lincoln and his enthusiasm for the trail. And another Connellsville restaurant story that I heard recently was there was this group that was at a local restaurant, and the one guy was injured. He was 81 years old, by the way. He had an injury. They were talking about needing some medical supplies, and the guy at the next table happens to be the mayor. And so Mayor Lincoln hears them, says, hey, I can take you to the pharmacy. We'll be back before your dinners are out. And, that's the kind of thing that I don't think there were any or many Mayor Lincolns along the Great Allegheny Passage 15 years ago. Yeah. So that's a really neat change to observe. Bryan, Susie, any thoughts?
I'll say from my perspective, I live very close to West Newton, and obviously from meeting people at the business, seeing more people move to West Newton or other towns near the Gap Trail and out of Allegheny County into some of these smaller areas, because they've mentioned, I'm here all the time to use the trail. So I figured I might as well buy a house here, and it's affordable to live in this region. So I've seen a really big shift in that. And a lot of the people then that are moving there because of the trail get involved with the trail stewardship and community events surrounding the trail. So I definitely have noticed a shift with new people moving to the region because of the asset of the trail.
Neat.
Maybe two things on my end. One, we've seen an uptick in local entrepreneurs who have started shuttling companies along the Gap. That's the second bit of development after restaurant and lodging entrepreneurs have been in towns. There are several local folks between Pittsburgh and Cumberland who've started up businesses to help tourists get from place to place or move their luggage from place to place. That's sort of thinking in advance about the direction in which tourism is going on the part of folks who are seeing it day to day. Probably for us, the most delightful example, and I may ask Larry, you or Pope or anyone else from Confluence just to pipe up here, but 11 years ago, Confluence had one restaurant and 4 places for overnight lodgers on the Great Allegheny Passage, and these days there are 4 restaurants and over 20 places to stay. And some of that is because of local folks taking risks to start up businesses to serve travelers. Other components have been folks moving in, seeing opportunities to be part of communities, partly like you've done, Sharon, to really dive in deep and make a difference. It's taken 10 or 15 years to sort of build those kinds of opportunities and trust. But Confluence is a lovely example, and it's home of one of the chief shuttle entrepreneurs along the Gap.
Mm. So Larry and Pope, you sort of, I think everyone probably wants to hear from you now. Do one or both of you want to say a little bit about what's happening in Confluence? How the feat occurred?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Larry can speak for himself as well, but yeah, I mean, we took a risk. We saw all the potential out here. I mean, and everything that we've done to support the trail has come back to support us.
Mm-hmm.
And we took a couple big risks, but the town is shifting before our eyes. And how do we know this? We see them all walking into our coffee shop to buy coffee every morning. Two things happened. High-speed internet got here. Second, the COVID shift happened. So people are just buying up everything out here. And people inherently just see all the potential for this little town. You know, Larry, you want to pick up on that?
I don't know how much I can add, Pope, since you were like a year ahead of me and saw the potential. The demographics of the town are changing pretty rapidly. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And some people are a little resistant to change, even when they agree that it's beneficial. It's just a difficult thing to cope with. We've seen, I would say 90% minimum of the people that walk in through our doors like to change and are supportive. And the surprising thing to me is that that's spread across all age groups. So some of the biggest advocates we've got are people almost as old as I am. And it's kind of encouraging to see that. And some of the strongest support we've had is from people that have been in the town forever. It's not just the newcomers. So part of the town's growth is due to the pandemic, frankly, and the fact that the town does have a fiber connection now, which facilitates remote work. And there are arts organizations in town that have been doing a great job. And I think they have helped the outreach effort and are bringing more people into the fold, where they are gradually opening their minds to the things that new investment can bring. I don't think I can add anything more specific than that. It's generally been a very welcoming environment, and I'm excited to be part of it too.
Yeah, and I really agree with Amy too about the art part. I mean, that's where we're going to be focusing on. Our art space here is designed to bring you in, have a cup of coffee, come in, have a third place. And I'm really starting to look at how we've always envisioned it as being an art destination. So we're using art to pull people off the Gap. I know, I can't think of her name right now. It's over at the Ruins. She's doing a great job. So, I mean, that's going to be our focus, but we've just found everybody to be very, very welcoming. The trail numbers have been really good for us this year. A lot of bicyclists out front drinking coffee. We're just tickled, and we see it shifting before our eyes, and we're glad to see it, because we knew we were right in our idea. Like, let's go do this crazy thing in the mountains and let's see if it goes. And here we are. Yeah, I couldn't be happier to be here.
Well, thanks for congratulations on your success, and thanks for sharing your experience. Rachel Sager with the Ruins Project,
Yes.
One of the best little spots on the entire Great Allegheny Passage. So here's the thing about this idea of trail towns, of, like intentionally, improving trail to town connections. It's something that started on the Gap. It's been done all over the place now, and it's an idea that is transferable. It's been exported all around, the United States and now Canada. And, we have people here with us from rural New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Nova Scotia. Like these are we have a lot more in common via trails than we might realize. And, we're just talking now about confluence, in the mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania, but these ideas, they transfer. So, let's take a few minutes to talk about what challenges remain along the Great Allegheny Passage and how our panelists think that we might address those. You want to start, Susie?
Sure. Some of the challenges that we've run into, sign ordinances that are outdated, that don't allow signage at trailheads to draw people into town, to let them know what they can find in town. And I think a lot of those rules are pretty old, and it's probably time to rethink some of those changes. And maybe it's not a light up sign, maybe it's a sign that has a special look to it, but something to let people on the trail know there's a town here and here's what you can see or buy or do at this town. And this is a pervasive problem where I live in the Mon Valley. There are sometimes Main Street real estate costs that are relatively high given the state of the building. So it might have been a building that has sat vacant for quite some time and will take a lot of money to revamp the building. And the asking price is high. So then it sits even longer and gets in worse shape. And that storefront remains empty. The Progress Fund has been fantastic at helping with some of these issues, but that's a pervasive issue of, let's see if we can move more real estate and get people into these Main Street locations or locations near the trail to make the towns a little bit more welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Bryan, or should I?
Sharon, would you like to speak next?
So a couple of things. It occurred to me that people may be hearing me speak and wondering, where is she from? And I always forget to say that because I forget that I have an accent. So if you are, I'm sorry. I normally tell people I was born in Trinidad, the southernmost island of the Caribbean, and was bred in New York, and somehow ended up in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and loving it. I love the fact that in a small town, a trail town, you can feel like family, feel like you get to know the people. Some of the challenges, so that's the good side. The other side of that is the fact that some people are so used to the community the way they are. Embracing someone that looks different from they are is still a challenge in many small towns or trail towns. And I think we trail towns need to figure out, how can we be more welcoming to people that look different or sound different than they are? Another challenge I see is the fact that trail towns, if we were to cater more to trail users, that would do so well for our town. We just heard from Larry and Pope and what they did. They provided a service that people needed that were coming off the trail. Simple things like t-shirts, a place that maybe caters just for a shower, a change of clothes, or a shower. These are creative ideas, I think, that we could explore as a small town close to a trail. A place where people can just do their laundry, take a shower, get a souvenir from your town, or maybe a cup of coffee and continue riding. Keeping our trails clean, making our trails a place that not just trail users use, but ways of inviting the community to kind of like allow the trail and the community to be part of the same thing. And finally, and I'll let you continue, Bryan, keeping our trails clean. I think many times when we're expecting someone to come to our homes, we tend to clean up and make things nice. Oh, my mother-in-law is coming over for a weekend, so you clean up and you want to make everything nice for her. I think as a small town, we should always be focused on thinking of our small town as our home. we want to clean up and make sure everything is looking good and ready, because we don't know when a trail user, a trail rider may come through. I think Connellsville, and I must boast a little, we are we are concerned about these things, and we're trying to figure out ways in which we can do them even better. The Fayette Cultural Trust, the redevelopment, the Connellsville Canteen is like the ground zero of love and passion for the trail and downtown Connellsville. But I think there are many things we can do. And as a matter of fact, with the number of minds that are on this program right now in different communities, I know that because each person on here, they're passionate about their community or trails in general. And you may have ideas that's specifically related to your community. So I think just being bold and thinking about what's missing, or what else would I want to have in my community if I were riding the trails, is a good place to start. Thank you, Amy, for reminding us of all of these things.
Thank you.
Thanks. Here are a couple challenges that that I would bring up. One is COVID related. Staffing is challenging for small businesses right now. It has been for a year and a half and doesn't seem to be getting any easier. So entrepreneurs and proprietors are just having trouble keeping the doors open in some places and in some business sectors. And a lot of folks who are running their own businesses are just putting in a lot of hours. You know, I know a certain bed and breakfast owner that hasn't had a day off since April, right? So she's feeling burned out, and I'm hoping, we're all hoping, to be able to get through this public health crisis and get folks back working in positions that they feel great about. From a tourist standpoint, I think how towns can think about entertainment and events on Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights is an untapped opportunity for cyclists who are staying overnight. Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, 3 relatively busy nights on the Gap. We've got some great Saturday daytime events, right? Pumpkin Fest runs for several daytime events every fall in Confluence. The Maple Festival in Myersdale is 2 weekends plus a week in between. The crossing of the Youghiogheny at Braddock's Crossing in Connellsville is a fun reenactment event. The Rose Garden in McKeesport offers great daytime place to wander around if you're there. But when folks are staying overnight, having events or places to go once they're done with dinner and a beer or two could be helpful. I'm not saying these have to be regular weekly kinds of events, but if there are, you know, 2 or 3 weekend evenings a month, or sorry, every season, right, every summer, to attract folks who are wanting to spend a little bit more money or stay out a little bit later, that could be helpful too, right? But those aren't cheap and they're staff intensive to put on. And I'm not suggesting that they're easy, but there's some growth opportunity there along the way. So events on the one hand, staff retention and satisfaction is another current challenge with COVID.
Satisfaction on the part of
the work of the frontline workers, right? Who are making beds and frying eggs and cashing folks out and scooping ice cream and serving coffee and beer, right? Making sure that your staffers are in place, they're able to come to work, they like their work, and they're able to and feel comfortable interacting with tourist guests.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, tourism traditionally has been all about the visitor, but I mean, it really is a relationship. It's a two-way relationship. People who work in tourism and hospitality work very hard, especially now. And I think the way we think about, you know, visitor interactions, you know, maybe we have to think a little bit differently about it. Something I read recently said that, you know, visitors maybe need to exhibit a little bit more grace in this very difficult period. I'm always talking about how, you know, we as at the community level have to be more hospitable, but that goes both ways.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for those insights, all three of you. Really appreciate thinking about what still needs some work, because those are the tough kind of conversations we have to be able to have. And I want to say, Sharon, you started to reference, you didn't use the words, but you were talking about equity and inclusion, and those weren't things we were thinking about when the Trailtown program was designed and launched, 15 years ago. But that's where trail communities to be now. That's what we have to be thinking about now. Like, how welcoming are we? How inclusive are we? Of trail users, of people of every walk of life, of people who live in our communities and just aren't getting out to the trails. We have to be thinking really hard about this because it's not just about that economic piece. So Pope, I was just going to open it up to questions and comments. We have another 10 minutes or so go right ahead.
Well, I was going to say about the inclusion part. I mean, one of the things that was really important to us because there are still, a lot of Confederate flags around in our neighborhoods out here, and especially for people of color, that's not very welcoming. And so we make it very clear that our place is a safe place. It's a very safe place. And I think more of that, more of people put it out there that this place is different. You can come in here and it may not feel welcoming out there, but it will here, and also like going out of your way for the riders. I have so many times just opened my shop when I was closed because they're out front. They look tired and they really want a cup of coffee. And I just happened to be in the shop. Just go that extra mile for them. It took me, it takes me extra 10 minutes to pour these guys coffee and get them down the trail, but it means the world to them too. And on the end of that, people need to open more coffee shops on the Gap. I can't be the only one.
Yes. Right. I saw a thread this summer about where can I get good coffee, and there were not a lot of responses. And thank you for what you do. I had a group of women to Confluence a couple of years ago. It was a group of 6 women. 3 of them were women of color, and I intentionally routed our route into town so that we didn't cross those Confederate flags. And I don't know if that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but I didn't want people to come right into town and to feel scared or upset. But yeah, it's good to have those kind of safe places in the meantime. All right, any other comments, questions? Sally, do you feel like coming off the mute and talking about your comment?
Yeah, sure. One of the things, just getting back to your equity and inclusion piece, is that one of the things that we are doing here is working kind of in partnership with BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of other communities of color, outdoor enthusiasts from those communities, to have them, to support them to be trained in leadership certificates and like hike leadership and biking certificates and things, so that our leadership in our communities is more representative of the people that we're hoping to include and attract. Because I think one of the things that, we all love what we do, and we're enthusiastic and friendly, and we want to make sure that people are comfortable. But one of the best ways of making people, I feel, comfortable is, somebody who looks like you and understands that, your backstory a little better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And it's been really fun. It's been exciting because, there's a real enthusiasm and excitement among the folks that are starting to get trained and coming up through the, and becoming part of the leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Keep me posted, please.
Yeah, if I may, Amy, I had the honor of speaking at the Rotary Club here in Connellsville today. And one of the things I was sharing with them is the fact that we all need or want something in life. And we don't know who has what we want, who have what we want, or who can connect us to the person who's holding on to what we want. And so the need to get to know people, it's just so critical, not just for our immediate needs, but for our goals, our aspirations, for who we want to become. It could be in the hands of someone who may not look like you. or it could begin or happen in a massive way through the assistance of someone who just doesn't look or sound or even speak your language.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for all you're doing.
Thank you. Larry, you've had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Comment and a question. The comment is that I agree inclusion is important, and we want everybody to feel comfortable. We do not require masks, but we have a box of free masks at the door, and have I think gradually over the summer we've seen more customers wearing them and knowing that they're not going to be challenged or ridiculed. That's important. And even though we're directly opposite the trail, my favorite photo, you know, I'm at this all of 4 months, but my favorite photo so far shows our parking lot with a dozen bikes and a half dozen pickup trucks and a bunch of ATVs, and basically everybody's welcome. We don't care how you get here. So some people are coming directly off the trail, bikers and hikers, but a lot of people are doing other forms of recreation. There are a lot of rafters in the area, and our doors are open and everybody's welcome. And so far, that's worked really well. The question I have is very specific. I was listening to Bryan talk about events in particular, and I understand that's on us as Trailtown residents and business owners. I'd like to know what specifically we can do to lengthen the season on the trail, to encourage active trail use in what is typically regarded as the off-season, and get people out for day trips to come to a trail town. They're not going to go DC to Pittsburgh and stop everywhere, but we should be able to entice people to a town and maybe have them rotate towns and do something like the passport the Laurel Highlands does, where you go and get stamps from breweries. We could get stamps from trail towns, and if you visit a certain number during the season, there's something for you. But if people come to Confluence, for example, and access the trail for a day hike or biking if conditions allow, or cross country or snowshoeing if those conditions are right, we want to get more people recreating through the winter. And I don't know how to do that, or if anybody has experience doing that, but we would like to actively encourage that. I'm looking for ideas.
Yeah, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, Larry, which isn't my strong suit, but I will think about this a little bit more clear-headedly and get back to you. But off the top of my head, sure, outside of cycling, which for the casual user is, 50 degrees and up, and the dieharders maybe at 35 degrees or up and up, hoping for snow and taking advantage of snow on the trail is a great thing. Thinking of events, is there a possibility of a late afternoon bonfire somewhere off the trail in Confluence the last Saturday of the month, or in any other trail town, sort of as a way to welcome folks in and say, hey, come grab dinner, come grab a hot chocolate, stay another few hours, grab a meal. Here's, it'd have to be valuable to locals too, of course, right? But maybe a local tradition to do that in September, October, November, December, once a month could be a trial or pilot kind of run, right? In Lawrenceville neighborhood in Pittsburgh, there's a Christmas time cookie push with Christmas cookies at all the businesses along Butler Street. Maybe that's an opportunity for any one trail town to do and market and say it's it's Christmas cookie time from noon to 6 on the 3rd and 4th Fridays of November and December. Come for a cookie push and a bonfire, something like that. Gosh, those seem like half-baked, no pun intended, ideas, but I will think about it some more. Anybody else?
I wanted to pipe in and hilariously, because I'm actually working on a project, hopefully for the next year, where I'm going to do a 4-day welding intensive here at the tissue farm and bring the kids in to teach them how to weld. And in that process, we're going to build a fire hearth, which is basically a 15-foot tall sculpture that is a fire chimney that it's like a bonfire, but it's contained. And then we were thinking about having events across from tissue farm in the fall, in the spring, where the kids can come also and see that, oh, I helped make this. And I can come stand around the fire that I helped make the thing, and I learned how to weld, and now I have a new skill. So like, we're already thinking about something like that. But that's down the road. But hopefully for next season, if we can get the whole thing together. But now that the building's a little bit more together, we can hopefully start planning those things.
That sounds great. Yeah, there are so many great winter events out there all over the place. And finding ways to extend the season, it's important. And one little thing I would add is, I think demonstrating during like the high season of trails that this community has a lot to offer. If you come into a town, you can tell there's a pulse to it. Public Project for Public Spaces, they say that like great places, like you should be able to do like 10 different things, right? So like think about like a place in your community or your community itself, like what are the like different things someone could do on a rainy day. What else is there that's not trail related? Can they notice that during the high season, and then be given reason and encouragement to come back and just do other things, whether they put their foot on the trail or not. So just something to consider. So we are just slightly over time. I feel that this group could keep talking and continue to have a really fruitful conversation. I wish that we could. I'm going to ask our panelists if you could just share like one final word of wisdom or encouragement. I would be grateful to hear it.
Well, to your point, Amy, maybe we should continue the conversation. So maybe we could have some regular meetings to talk amongst those of us involved with trail towns and outdoor recreation. And I just wanted to point out something that I saw happen this year that was like perfect for bringing a lot of this together was one of our youth community centers in West Newton, Waypoint, they got a shipping container and they bought a plot of land right on the trail, and they opened a little hamburger hoagie stand called the Outpost, and the kids from the youth center are running that hot dog hamburger stand. It just closed for the season, but it was a workforce development project too, where they had to learn the restaurant business, and 10% of the proceeds, I believe, go to a college fund for the students involved. And they got so many people, and people were so excited to have a place right along the trail to stop and have a bite to eat. And it was like, this is the perfect thing to pull all of this together and involve the community and involve young people.
Nice. Sharon?
Wow. So many ideas are bubbling in my head, and especially too, because having lived in New York City and worked in the heart of the city, lived in the heart of the city, and graduated from the heart of the city university, NYU, there's so many thoughts going on because the contrast is so vast, right? I've lived in a town where they call the concrete jungle, and now I'm in a trail town where there are trees and a river that runs in the middle of my city. And what can we do? There's so many opportunities. Whereas electric lighting was the bright light in New York City, I think the trails in these small towns is really the bright light. And it could be even brighter if we continue to make it a destination place, if we continue to use the destination as a ripple effect to impact the rest of the city, not just for the finances of it, but for the beauty of the entire city, to create specific recreational and businesses that cater to trail users. And I know many small towns are doing it, but to deliberately, consciously think of what else can we do to impact trail users. I think it's a great asset, not just economically, but socially. And finally, I think the ability to collaborate with each other, like small towns coming together. This Gap Trail runs through what, 5, 8 different, how many different counties? 5 or 8, I believe.
5 counties.
5, yeah. How about if small towns got together, just one next to each other, and say, what else can we do to collaborate on a project? It could be, let's say, Christmas on the trail. So between your community and my community, we do things, and this goes to Pope's question or concern. Was it Pope or Larry? About what can we do to extend the season, collaborate and figure out how can we as 2 communities come together to really extend, make our 2 communities the place where you want to come in the off season, because that's where it's happening. So those, I know there are many ideas just tend to want to flow, because I love this place called Connellsville, Pennsylvania so much, in this little city. Thank you for having me, Amy. It's just such an honor to be here with all of you.
Thank you.
Maybe in closing, Amy, I would just encourage folks to get out of their own counties and states and go visit a trail a state away and see how other folks are doing things. Go as the visitor and the tourist, things are like. And then maybe lastly, for those of you in professional roles in trail work or community development, go buy 15 copies of Amy's book and pass them out to your board members. And buy another 10 and pass them out to the 10 most motivated and or frustrated folks in your trail towns regarding the nature of the trail and the business community there. It's really inspirational. There's a ton of great tools. Amy's available for really rich and deep consultation. And no, she didn't ask me to, but I think it's a great resource. So please do follow up. It's a cutting edge work. And she's a great resource.
Bryan, thank you. Thank you, Susie and Sharon, for being part of the panel, and to all of you for being part of what's become an international conversation tonight. It was so much fun to have this talk, and I am just going to say, keep at it. Keep at it and do the work at the local level. Continue to do the work for your residents while you also are working to be very hospitable to your visitors, and good things will happen. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Carly to close the meeting.
Thank you all for attending tonight. I got to tell you, my heart is really warmed by all the great conversation that we've had. Thank you, Larry, Pope, Sally, Greg, all of you chiming in, our panelists, Sharon, Bryan, it's Susie, and most of all to you, Amy. You've really fostered so much goodness in these trail towns, in the communities you've developed. I'm proud that we could host you tonight. It's really such an honor. And thank you for helping bring us all forward and making us a stronger community.
Thank you.
With that, I will just wrap it up and say, we will get the recording of this out for all of those of you, if you wanted to share it with folks you know, and those of us who couldn't make it at the last minute. We've heard from a number of folks, so that they can also be part of this.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.
Good night, Amy. Good night, everyone.